Welcome back to the Snowpoint cast. Today we're going to be reviewing a deck called Ludicargo. It's a deck from 2006. It got top 32 at the World Championship. Actually, a buddy of mine, John Kettler, really nice guy. Not with this particular list, but he was the one who top 32 with it. Man's is a gem. Okay, so let's get right into it. So play 4 Lotad. Lotad has 50 HP, single retreats, weak to lightning. Has one attack. It's called Surprise. For 10, choose one card from your opponent's hand without looking. Look at the card you chose, and then have your opponent shuffle that card into his or her deck. Which, can be really good if your opponent benches like 3 Pokemon on their first turn and they only have 1 supporter card in their hand, and you surprise them turn 1. You have a 1 in 4 shot of just yoinking that supporter out of their hand, and just like minusing your opponent cards is really good too. So you play 2 Lombre as well. Lombre has 70 HP. It has a body called Aqua Lift. If it has any water energy attached to it, it's got free retreat, which is pretty nice. Then it also has an attack called Ambush. So for 2 colorless, for 20, you flip a coin if heads. If you get a heads, it does 20 more. So, you're doing 40. Not amazing, but, 70 HP and a body. It's better than a lot of other stage 1s in the format. Okay, so this is the main Ludicolo that you play. So you play 3 of this Ludicolo. It has 100 HP and the Poke Power Swing Dance. Once during your turn, you may draw a card. So if you have 3 in play, you just get a straight draw 3. But it has a lot of synergy with McCargo, which we're going to go over in a sec. You have 2 attacks as well. One of them is called Healing Steps. For 1 water, you do 30, which is decent. And then you can discard as many cards as you want from your hand. And if you do, you remove that many damage counters from Ludicolo. So, can be really clutch depending on what your board is. Also has an attack called Circular Steps. So for 3 water double colorless, you do 10 times the amount of Pokemon in play, excluding Ludicolo. So it doesn't mean every Ludicolo, it means only that Ludicolo. It's kind of confusing wording. The wording in 2006 is actually pretty not the best. But weak to lightning, has 2 retreat and 100 HP. Not crazy high for HP, but you do a lot of damage with Circular Steps. You max out at 110 if your opponent has a full board and you have a full board as well. So it's a lot of damage for 3 energy. So you also play one of these, Ludicolo. It's got a Poke Power called Happy Dance. And it's kind of a tech Ludicolo for spread decks. But Happy Dance says once during your turn, you may remove 1 damage counter from each of your Pokemon. So versus Tyranitar and stuff, like if they're hitting you for Spinning Tail or Bomb Tar, if they're Spinning Tailing you, it negates that by half, which is a lot. It means that their 20s now turn to 10s, and it gives you double the amount of time before they clear your board. Water Punch is a crazy attack. It's actually kind of good depending on what you have. If you have 2 scrambles, it can be crazy. So for 3 colorless, it does 40, and then flip a coin for each water energy attached to Ludicolo, and it does 20 more for each heads. So if you have 2 scrambles on there, you're doing potentially 60, 120, 160 if you have 2 scrambles. You only play 2 in the deck, but you can if you hit a bunch of heads, you can just knock out a Blastoise, which is kind of crazy. If that's what you need to do to win the game, Water Punch can be really good. It's not really good. You'd rather Circular Steps, but it's kind of interesting attack. So you play a 2/2 McCargo line. And I'm going to talk about this Slugma for a second. So there's a couple different Slugmas in the format. There's one that stops your opponent from retreating. There's another one that lets you just draw a card for a colorless. And they both have 50 HP. But I prefer this one because it has a single retreat cost. Those other 2 Slugmas have 2 retreat, which is kind of bad, especially when you play Jirachi in this deck. And Jirachi is an important draw consistency. So if you start with those Slugma and you don't have a switch out in your hand, you're kind of just stuck drawing a single card or making your opponent not retreat. And Yawn is good too. Yawn just puts your opponent asleep, so you're stalling for a turn. It's not like it has a bad attack. The attack is pretty good as well. You sacrifice 1 HP, but I actually think that the retreat cost is better because of how important Jirachi is to your deck. Headbutt for 10 is cool too, I guess. Okay, so McCargo, this is the reason the deck's called Ludicargo, because Smooth Over is crazy. So they actually reprinted this card. Some people might know this card from the reprint. But so it's got a power called Smooth Over. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a card, shuffle your deck, and then put that card on top of your deck. So that has a lot of synergy with Swing Dance because you can just straight put it in your hand. You Smooth Over, Swing Dance for 1, and then all of a sudden you just quick searched for a card into your hand. McCargo also can attack. Knockover isn't that great. Discard a stadium card. But Combustion for a fire double colorless, if you attach a Scramble, it can one-shot a Metagross Delta, which can be good, especially because Ludicolo is weak to lightning. So that's a tough matchup, and being able to one-shot a Metagross for a single energy is kind of a clutch attack that McCargo has. Okay, so you play 3 Jirachi. Jirachi has a Pokebody called Wishing Star. Once during your turn, before you attack, if Jirachi is your active Pokemon, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, put one of them in your hand, and then Jirachi's asleep. So good consistency, and it's kind of a good thing to go down on price. It's not a good thing, but it makes your scrambles live, and it just means you're attacking for a single energy attachment, which can be really clutch. And when you're playing a deck with Stage 2 Pokemon and Stage 1 Pokemon that you need to set up, playing a Wishing Star Jirachi is pretty important, I think. And I don't think a lot of decks that play Stage 2 Pokemon can get by without it. A couple can, but not a lot. Okay, so you play 1 Holon's Castform. Because you play McCargo and Ludicolo, which let you search for any one card every turn once you get the combo set up, you play a lot of one-ofs that are kind of niche, that have like uses depending on what your opponent's board state is. Castform is, you only play one of it, but it can be a double rainbow energy if you need it to be. So if you already have an energy attached, Castform works like this. So let's say you have a Pokemon and it's got an energy on it. You put the Castform on, pros do it like this because that's how you see the energy. And you put the energy back into your hand, and then all of a sudden it's got 2 rainbow. So you can metallic blow if you need to. I mean, not many things are weak to metal, but having that Pokemon search instead of an energy, so say you miss an energy, but you can search for a basic Pokemon, like you have a Holon Mentor, it means that you're not missing an attachment, which can be really good. Okay, so you also play a 2/2 Rhydon. So not a lot of Ludicargo lists at the time played this, but I really like this Rhydon. So the Rhydon has a body called Power Diffusion. As long as Rhydon is your active Pokemon, prevent all damage done by attacks to your bench Pokemon. So Spinning Tail, if you have a Rhydon active, Spinning Tail does nothing to your bench Pokemon. It does 20 to the active, which is great. That's a great trade-off. Anything that tries to snipe your bench as well, like if they try to feint attack you, or any other decks that try to hit your bench for damage, Rhydon just says no. Rhyhorn, so it's got an attack called Double Stop. I'm just going to talk about that for a sec. Flip 2 coins, does 10 damage times the number of heads. Pretty mediocre. Single retreat's kind of nice because Rhyhorn's a pretty fat boy, so for him to have a single retreat's cool. 60 HP. So the attacks on Rhydon, one of them's Horn Drill, so for a single colorless it does 20. Your fighting type as well, so having that lightning weakness is pretty bad on Ludicolo, but you counteract that with the Rhydon a little bit, because some things that are weak to lightning, like Metagross that I was talking before, are weak to fire, but other things like Dark Ampharos are weak to fighting, and most of the lightning type Pokemon in the format are weak to fighting. So having that fighting type is nice to mix up on your board, because now you're playing with water, fire, and fighting type if you need it, and even metal if that's what you really need. So it has a second attack called Hyper Tail. It does 50. The defending Pokemon has any powers or bodies. It does 20 more damage. So 70 for fighting double colorless is pretty decent, especially when you can just attach a Scramble to that. If your opponent, let's say they're playing Drag Trode and they have a Sneasel active and they killed something, then you can just put up a Rhydon, attach a Scramble, and then one-shot the Sneasel, which is pretty good. And the deck doesn't really have any ways to deal with a good Drag Trode player. Like if they're keeping their board to an Electrode. Oh, that's another thing that can mess up Ludicolo is Dark Electrode. So Dark Electrode's a lightning type, and it's also weak to fighting. So another thing that Rhydon comes in really clutch in. But yeah, Hyper Tail, just good attack. Lets you hit for damage on Pokemon with powers or bodies, and it also lets you hit for fighting weakness, which is really good for the deck. Okay, we're going to get into some of the trainers. So you play 3 Holon Transceiver. Holon Transceiver is a staple in any deck that plays Holon supporters. It's a great card. It says search your deck for a supporter card that has Holon in its name. Show it to your opponent, put it in your hand. So it lets you search for those Holon Mentors early. If you find a Transceiver, all of a sudden you have a Mentor in your hand. But it's also really good in the late game because it lets you take Holon supporters out of your discard pile and put them in your hand. So yeah, overall, great card. And it's one of the most expensive cards for old format because of how good it is. So you play 3 Rare Candy as well. So the rare candy rule, and there's some different counts of rare candy for different decks. You only play one stage 2 line in this deck. So the rare candy rule kind of goes like this. You play one more candy than you need. So let's say, for example, you want to get 4 Ludicolos into play, 2 Lombres, 2 candies, and you have one extra one just in case it's prized or whatever. And it just, you don't need more than that, especially when you have the search of McCargo and Ludicolo. But yeah, the rare candy rules usually just play one more than what you need, and this deck plays a 4-2-3-1 stage 2 line, so you play 3 candies. Okay, so this deck plays some one-ofs, and like I was saying before with McCargo and Ludicolo, you can search this out whenever you need. So you play one Ancient Technical Machine Rock. The main reason you play this is against other stage 2 decks when they like overextend with rare candies. Like let's say they just try to pressure your board down and go rare candy Pidgeot, rare candy Tyranitar, Dark turn 1, and then you go okay, and then they go double rainbow attack Spinning Tail. You could just Stone Generator them, and then all of a sudden their board, you punish them for overextending on their board, and you only play one because there's not a ton of situations where it's really good. But when Ancient Technical Machine Rock is really good, it comes in so clutch and can win you games for sure. So you play one Solid Rage as well. You can only be attached to Evolved Pokemon. Stone Generator can also only be attached to Evolved Pokemon. But if you have more prize cards than your opponent, the Pokemon that Solid Rage is attached to does 20 more damage. So it's really good because it lets you get a lot of surprise knockouts. Not every Ludicolo deck plays Solid Rage. So your opponent's thinking, okay, well, he can Circular Steps for 90, and I have 120 HP, so should be fine. And then you bench a Pokemon and attach Solid Rage, and all of a sudden, they thought that the resources that they had committed to their active were safe, and you knock them out. So it's really good for getting a lot of surprise knockouts. You play a Warp Point as well. Warp Point is the only hard switch out in your deck that you play, other than Mr. Brownies Compassion. But yeah, so Warp Point is another kind of clutch card. It depends what your opponent's board is, but sometimes you don't want to attack into the active. Like, let's say they have a slow setup and they're keeping the stuff on their bench that they want to evolve for later, and they threw something in the active that they don't really care about. When you play a Warp Point, you can just take something on the bench that you would rather kill than the active. And again, you only play one because of the McCargo Ludicolo combo, but yeah, it can be really good as well. So you play one POW hand extension as well. So POW is a crazy card. Lets you have 2 options, but only if you're down on prizes. So the first option lets you move an energy card from the active Pokemon to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So that can be really good if your opponent has a Scramble Energy or a Double Rainbow, because Scramble Energy and Double Rainbow Energy can only be attached to evolved Pokemon. And if they have a benched basic Pokemon, you can just move it to that Pokemon, and since the effect of being attached to an evolved Pokemon isn't fulfilled, the card actually just gets discarded. So that's a really good use for it, depending on what your opponent's board is. Like, getting rid of a Scramble Energy is pretty good. But also POW lets you bring up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon if you want. Like if, let's say they have an EX that you want to kill, or a Blastoise or something, like a Blastoise EX, and you just want to hit the Blastoise for a bunch of damage, you can POW it, bring it up, and then kill it. So yeah, POW is a really good card. And again, you only play one. This is all the one-ofs you play are niche, and they're used in certain situations, but because of the consistency that Ludicargo provides, it lets you play a lot of those tricky one-ofs. Okay, getting into Stadium. So you play 4 Battle Frontier. I think Battle Frontier is the best Stadium card from 2006. Crazy card. It literally just shuts off a bunch of decks. So each player's normal type evolved Pokemon, dark type evolved Pokemon, and metal type evolved Pokemon can't use any Poke Powers or bodies. So that shuts off a plethora of decks. You shut off Dragtrode, you shut off Meta Knight. Any deck that plays Pidgeot, you just tell them, no, your Pidgeot's not working unless you find a Stadium. And since your Pidgeot's not working, you can't just quick search for a Stadium, so you better have one in your hand. Yeah, so really good card. You play 4 because with Ludicolo and McCargo, it's kind of a niche consistency line. You don't play any of those types. You don't play Pidgeot for consistency. You play Jirachi, but it only affects evolved Pokemon, and since Jirachi's a basic, you just don't care. But yeah, Battle Frontier is crazy good. That's the reason Jason K won Worlds. Battle Frontier, with being able to lock that in with Mutrick, is crazy good. Okay, let's get into the supporters. So you play 3 Celio's Network. Celio's Network says you can search your deck for a basic Pokemon or evolution card that isn't Pokemon EX. Doesn't matter because you don't play any. And put it in your hand. So that's great for finding a Ludicolo to start drawing. Great to find a McCargo. even like, let's say you have a Celios and nothing else other than like an energy in your hand. You can just attach to the active, retreat into a Jirachi that you just searched with Celios, and all of a sudden you're at least doing something with your turn. So yeah, Celios is really good. It, also, just like finding your Pokemon that you need mid game is good as well. Like it's just a good Pokemon search. So you play 3 admin. Because you play 3 Jirachi, a lot of the times you go down a Jirachi before you start taking prizes. And admin just lets you come back. Solid Rage, Pow Hand Extension. All the cards in this deck really kind of depend on like going down. So if you go down on prizes, admin's really good. Also just mid to late game, being able to hurt your opponent's hand. If they have like a 13 or like 12, 10, 11 size hand, you can just get rid of it. And being able to disturb your opponent's hand like that in this format is really good because there's a lot of really good draw and search in this format, like Pidgeot and Jirachi. Okay, so you play 2 Holon Mentor. Holon Mentor is a great consistency supporter. You have to discard a card from your hand for every Holon supporter. So you discard a card, and that lets you search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon that has 100 HP or less. So you can get a Lotad, a Slugma, and a Jirachi, or a Rhyhorn, a Jirachi, and a Slugma. Or, you know, if you miss an energy, like I was saying before with the Castform, you can go Castform, Rhyhorn, Lotad, and then the next turn you at least have an energy attachment if you don't have one in your hand. So yeah, Mentor's a great card. You play 1 Holon Scientist. Another Holon card, so you got to discard a card from your hand to play it. If you have less cards in your hand than your opponent, draw cards until you have the same number of cards as your opponent. So because of Holon Transceiver, it lets you use that a couple times in the game, and there's a lot of cards like Steven's Advice, which, especially because you attack based on your whole board, you often want a full bench if you can hit it, just so your circular steps does the max amount of damage. And your opponent gets a benefit off that because of Steven's Advice. So Steven's Advice says you can draw... I think I might actually have one here. Yeah, we play one. Okay, so let's just go right into that. So Steven's Advice says draw number of cards up to the number of your opponent's Pokemon in play. If you have more than 7 cards, including this one in your hand, you cannot play it. So a lot of decks play this card, and because you have such a full board all the time, your opponent's often going to be Steven's Advising for 6, which sucks. You don't want to see that many cards in your opponent's hand. But, you know, being able to admin them is good, but sometimes you just need to draw cards, and being able to Scientist to straight draw 7 is really good as well. So yeah, Holon Scientist is a really good because of Steven's Advice as well. So you also play 1 Holon Adventurer. Holon Adventurer is another Holon supporter. Discard a card from your hand, and then draw 3 cards. If it's a Holon card that you discarded, so the only times that'll be that is if you're discarding a Scientist, a Mentor, or a Transceiver, then you can draw 4 cards. But yeah, it's just another supporter card that usually, if you're playing a Transceiver engine, you play 2 Mentor, a Scientist, and an Adventurer just because it keeps you consistent. Okay, so let's play 1 Mr. Brownies Compassion. So Mr. Brownies Compassion is a good card as well because often you're attacking with Scramble Energy. So if they're trying to 2-shot you, let's say they hit you for like 70 damage and you're really close to getting knocked out, you can just go Mr. Brownies Compassion on a Ludicolo. And if you have a Lombre in play, you can just straight evolve the Ludicolo, attach the Scramble, circular steps. Or if you have a rare candy in your hand, or if you want to smooth over for a rare candy, if you can do that, then you go smooth over for a rare candy, get the rare candy in your hand with a swing dance, Brownies, pick it up again. And the cool thing about Brownies too is it lets you use the abilities because the Pokemon returns to your hand. So your opponent has no way of knowing whether that Ludicolo was the one on the board or a new one. So you get to use the ability again. So you can smooth over, swing dance for a rare candy, pick it all up, Lotad, rare candy, Ludicolo, Scramble Energy, and you get to swing dance one more time again before you attack even. So yeah, that's it. Mr. Brownies, it's niche, but it is really good as well. Okay, so we're going to get into the energy cards. So we play 4 Double Rainbow. Double Rainbow lets you attack with all of your Evolved Pokemon. You can attack with a Ludicolo, lets you attack with a Rhydon, Hypertail plus an attachment. You know, you can swing dance for a Double Rainbow, and then the next turn, if you can find an energy, you're attacking, which 2 attachments instead of 3 is really preferable. So yeah, Double Rainbow. And the sacrifice of getting 2 energy is you do 10 less damage. It can also only be attached to Evolve Pokemon, but the card's staple in almost every Stage 2 deck. It's a really, really good card. So you play 4 Waters as well. Basic Waters are just for letting you fill that other attachment with Double Rainbow, mostly. But it also lets you play Holon Energy WP, which we're going to get into in a second. And basic waters are kind of important in a few matchups for that Holon Energy app. But yeah, we're going to go through Scramble first. So Scramble, like I was saying before, if you're down on prizes, it's 3 rainbow energy. And if you're up on prizes, it's just a single colorless. And it can only be attached to evolved Pokemon. But yeah, 2 Scramble, really, really good card as well. Okay, so back to the water energy. You play 1 Holon Energy WP. So Holon Energy WP says if the defending Pokemon, or if the Pokemon that Holon Energy WP is attached to has any basic water attached to it, prevent all effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. So there's a couple decks that's really good against. One of them is Dragtrode. So Sneasel, they can drag up whatever they want and then hit it for a bunch of damage if they have like special darks attached. And if you have a Holon Energy attached, it just means that they can't get that effect. If you're playing against a Queendom and they use Toxic on you, Toxic is an effective attack. It doesn't actually, the attack doesn't do anything. The effect poisons you for double. But if you have a Holon Energy attached, it does nothing. So Toxic is another thing that can be really bad for your board. But when you have a Holon Energy attached, it doesn't do anything. Another thing is Spider Trap. So Spider Trap is Ariados attack. So Flaridos can Spider Trap you. So it brings you up and puts you asleep and poisoned, which is really not what you want. But when you have a Holon Energy attached, it depends on a few matchups. And again, that's only why you play 1. But because of McCargo Ludicolo, you can play those cool 1-ofs that are really useful in certain matchups without worrying about your consistency, because it's a single one. It's a single card, and it's not that big of a deal, especially if it helps you win 1 or 2 games, like in a tournament back in the day. Like, really, really good card. Okay. Heal Energy, also niche depending on what deck you're playing. Really good against Flaridos and Queendom as well, because they burn and confuse you and poison you. But there can also be some cool numbered manipulation. So it heals a special effect and 1 damage. So you can do some number manipulation with that, but then the main reason you do it is to get out of Toxic. I mean, you play 1 because Queendom was one of the most dominant decks in the format. It got top 4 worlds, and Heal Energy, if you get Toxic, it does 20 to you. You attach a heal, and then you only have 1 damage. And so they wasted an attack to do 1 damage on a stage 2, which is like literally nothing. So yeah, that was Ludicargo. Really cool deck. Probably one of my favorite decks from back in the day. This list especially is really cool. So yeah, if you have any questions, leave them below and I'll get back to them. Thanks for tuning in.